The train screeched to a halt at the dusty little station, its whistle echoing across the endless plains. Steam hissed and swirled in the warm afternoon air as passengers spilled out onto the platform. Among them was Clara Whitfield, clutching her small leather trunk to her chest like it was the only anchor keeping her steady. She stepped down carefully, her boots finding the rough wooden planks, and glanced around with a mix of hope and dread. She had come all the way from Boston, answering an advertisement from a rancher out west seeking a wife. The words had been simple and practical, nothing flowery, just a man's plea for companionship and help on his land. Clara had thought perhaps this was her chance, her only chance, to start a life of her own. But as she scanned the thinning crowd, her heart began to sink. Families were reuniting, young men were embracing sweethearts, and merchants called out greetings to customers they knew by name. No one came forward for her. She stood there, her chest tightening, feeling the weight of stares prickling her back. A woman traveling alone with a trunk, dressed in a modest but worn dress, was easy enough to recognize. People guessed who she must be, the mail-order bride. Clara had endured whispers before, but never had they cut so deeply. Minutes stretched into an eternity. She waited, forcing herself to stay tall though her hands trembled. What if he had changed his mind? What if he had seen her picture, or read her letters, and decided she wasn't worth the trouble after all? Boston hadn't been kind to her, and she had no family to fall back on. Coming here had been a leap of faith, one she had pinned her whole future on. And now, as the last of the passengers dispersed, she felt foolish, abandoned, and unbearably small. The station grew quieter, save for the creak of wagon wheels and the distant whinny of a horse. Clara pressed her lips together, blinking back tears that threatened to spill. She thought of retreating into the station house, of perhaps asking the station master about the next train heading east, though she had no money left for a return ticket. Her throat tightened painfully. She couldn't go back. She had nothing there. It was then, just as she was about to lower her head in defeat, that she felt a tug at her skirt. Startled, she looked down. A little girl stood there, no more than 6 or 7, with wide brown eyes and a tumble of sun-bleached curls that escaped from beneath her bonnet. The child gazed up at her with innocent intensity, clutching a ragged doll in one hand. "Are you the lady from the picture?" the girl asked, her voice soft but clear. Clara blinked in surprise, unsure how to answer. I'm not sure," she managed. "What picture, darling?" The girl hesitated, then stepped closer, her small hand brushing against Clara's as though testing her warmth. "Papa showed me a picture. He said maybe you'd come. He said maybe you'd be my new mama." Her voice dropped to a whisper then, so tender and full of hope it made Clara's chest ache. "Can you be my mommy?" Clara's heart stopped for a beat, then surged painfully. The child's words pierced straight through her loneliness, melting the layers of doubt she had built around herself. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly brushed them away, afraid to frighten the girl. She crouched down so they were face to face, her skirts pooling around her. "My dear," she said gently, her voice trembling, "is your papa here?" The little girl pointed toward the far end of the platform. There, leaning against a post with his hat pulled low, stood a tall man with shoulders broad from years of labor. His shirt was simple, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and his boots were scuffed with dust. He looked weary, as if life had demanded more of him than he had to give, yet his gaze was fixed firmly on them. On her. Clara's breath caught. This must be him. The man who had written those plain, honest letters. The one she had crossed half the country for. He hadn't come forward. Why hadn't he? Was he disappointed? Or afraid? The little girl tugged her hand more firmly now, as if to guide her. Clara let herself be led, each step measured, her heart pounding louder than the crunch of her boots against the wood. When they stopped before him, the man removed his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and hardship, yet striking in its quiet strength. His eyes, the same warm brown as his daughter's, searched Clara's face with uncertainty. I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough, as though unused to speaking. "Didn't mean to keep you waiting. Just wasn't sure you'd come." Clara swallowed hard, her lips parting, but before she could speak, the little girl piped up with childlike conviction. "She came, Papa. I told you she would. She's here, and she's gonna be my mommy." The man's eyes softened then, flickering between Clara and his daughter. A muscle worked in his jaw as if he were fighting to hold back his emotions. Clara, overwhelmed by the tenderness of the moment, reached out and brushed a stray curl from the girl's cheek. "I did come," Clara whispered, her gaze lifting to meet his. "I wasn't sure what to expect, but I came." For a long moment, the three of them stood there, the weight of unspoken hopes and fears pressing around them. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of dust and hay, and a train whistle echoed faintly in the distance. But none of that mattered. Clara realized that, in this instant, she was no longer invisible, no longer unwanted. This child had claimed her, and perhaps, just perhaps, her father might as well. The man finally nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if some silent decision had been made. He placed his hat back on his head and extended his free hand to take her trunk. "Come on then," he said quietly. "Let's get you home." Clara glanced once more at the little girl, who beamed up at her with a smile so bright it chased away every shadow of doubt. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, following them into the vast unknown, her heart trembling with a hope she had thought long dead. It wasn't the welcome she had imagined. It was something far more precious. It was the beginning of belonging. The wagon wheels rattled over the dry earth, carrying Clara away from the little station and deeper into the open land that stretched endlessly beneath the blue sky. She sat on the seat beside William. His name had come quietly, almost reluctantly, as he helped her climb aboard, and the little girl nestled between them, clutching her doll. Clara's hands rested tightly on her lap, fingers knotted together to keep from trembling. She tried to steady her breath, tried to take in the world around her, but her thoughts spun faster than the wheels beneath them. The land was unlike anything she had ever seen. Back in Boston, buildings pressed close together, streets swarmed with people, and the air smelled of coal smoke and damp stone. Here, the horizon seemed to go on forever, dotted only by scattered trees, golden fields, and the distant shimmer of mountains. The air was clean, carrying the scent of sage and dust, warm on her cheeks as it whipped her hair loose from its pins. She had read about the West, had imagined it while staring at maps in the post office, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer vastness of it. Still, awe could not mask the nervousness that prickled at the back of her mind. William had spoken only a few words since they left the station, his hand steady on the reins, eyes fixed ahead. Clara wanted desperately to know what he thought of her, if he was disappointed, if he regretted sending for her. She had been passed over so many times before in life, cast aside by those who saw little value in her. The fear that he might see her the same way sat like a stone in her chest. The little girl, though, seemed blissfully unaware of any tension. She looked up at Clara with shining eyes and asked about everything she saw, why the grass was so tall, why the birds flew so fast, if Clara had ever seen a jackrabbit before. Clara answered each question with as much warmth as she could manage, grateful for the child's chatter, for the chance to let her voice soften instead of trembling. At one point, the girl leaned against her side, her small body trusting and warm. Clara hesitated only a heartbeat before slipping an arm around her, holding her gently. The simple contact sent a surprising rush of comfort through her, easing the loneliness she had carried for years. The child fit against her as if she had always been meant to be there. William's gaze flicked sideways then, his jaw tightening, though he said nothing. Clara wondered what he thought of the sight, whether it stirred some hidden ache in him, or whether he resented the ease with which his daughter had already attached herself to a stranger. The wagon rolled on for miles, the sun dipping lower in the sky. At last, a cluster of buildings appeared on the horizon, small and humble against the expanse of land. A barn with a sagging roof, a corral, and a modest house of weathered wood stood together like a fortress against the emptiness. Clara's throat tightened. This was to be her new home. When they drew near, William stopped the wagon and climbed down, offering a hand to help her. His palm was calloused and strong, and though he said nothing, Clara felt steadied by the brief contact. The little girl, Emma, she had learned during the ride, hopped down with her doll tucked under her arm, running ahead toward the house. Inside, the home was simple but clean. A wooden table stood in the center of the main room, a stove in the corner, shelves lined with jars and a few books. The walls were bare, save for a single cross above the doorway. It was not grand, not polished, but it bore the mark of hard work and quiet perseverance. Clara set her trunk near the wall, her fingers brushing over the lid as though grounding herself. Emma tugged her hand eagerly, showing her a little room at the back with a narrow bed and a patchwork quilt. "This was Mama's room," she said solemnly, her eyes too wise for her young years. "But you can stay here now. If you want." Clara's breath caught. She knelt and gathered the girl into her arms, unsure how to respond. She could feel the grief still lingering in this house, the absence of the woman who had once held this family together. She didn't want to erase that memory or take a place not rightfully hers. But Emma's arms wrapped around her neck with such fierce trust that Clara whispered, "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll take good care of it." Later, when Emma had settled into bed, William lingered by the door of the small room. His broad shoulders filled the frame, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Clara rose from the bedside, smoothing her dress nervously. "She's taken to you," he said at last, his voice low. "Quicker than I expected." Clara folded her hands together, searching his face. "She's a remarkable child. I hope I can be what she needs." He studied her a long moment, his gaze heavy but not unkind. "I didn't send for you because I needed a nursemaid," he said slowly. "This place, it's too much for one man alone. I need a partner. Someone willing to stand with me through the hard seasons. That's what I asked for." Clara's heart thudded painfully. She thought of the ad he had placed, the words plain and unembellished, asking not for beauty or charm but for steadiness, for companionship. She had believed she could be that. She wanted to believe she still could. "I didn't come here looking for comfort," she whispered. "I came because I want a life. A real one. If you'll have me, I'll work beside you, whatever that means." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or the faintest hint of hope. He gave a short nod, then stepped back, his voice gruff. "We'll see how it goes." Clara watched him disappear into the shadows of the main room, her chest aching with a mix of relief and uncertainty. She turned back to Emma, who stirred in her sleep, clutching her doll. Gently, Clara tucked the quilt around her and smoothed her curls. In that quiet, she allowed herself to breathe more deeply, to imagine that perhaps, against all odds, she had found the beginning of a place to belong. It would not be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But tonight, for the first time in years, she did not feel unwanted.